website. And I thought I would respond to it this way so to get back to the website and they'll get an answer to it. But it has to do with the church or churches. We believe there is only one church. Most people, as you know, believe there are multiple churches. Well, actually there are. But there's only one group that the Lord will approve of. That makes it very important. When you understand there's only one group the Lord approves of, that makes it imperative for us to make sure we know who that group is and that we're a part of it. That's one of the reasons why we're so diligent to study the Scriptures, to understand exactly what it is the Lord has said to us. Because in the end, in the day of the judgment, it's going to make a difference. It will make a difference. So this morning I'd like to talk about that with you for a little bit. In the beginning, the Church of Christ was born in the city of Jerusalem around the year 2930 A.D. Jesus had promised about a year earlier that he would build, he said, my church. Okay? It's singular. It's like building a house. You say, I will build my house. If you tell me you'll build your house, I assume you're going to build one house. And that's what most of us would assume, because that's the way we talk. Our Lord said, I'm going to build my church. It was his, it belonged to him, and he did. On the day of Pentecost, we read about it in the second chapter of the book of Acts, that the Church of Christ was formed by our Lord on that particular day. The Scriptures crystal clear in verse 47 that the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. The church was never spoken of before as being in existence. It was only spoken of in a prophetic sense. I will, in the future, I will build my church. It didn't exist then. And then when the time came, he fulfilled that prophecy, and he built his church. Regardless of what we think about all the religions in the world, this much we must be certain of. Jesus promised to build his church. Now, whether or not I'm a member of his church, well, of course we all say we are. Whether or not we're right, that's the $64 question, because that's going to be a deciding factor in the day of the judgment. So we must be very careful, and we try to be always. The church was missionary-minded and expanded rapidly up into Asia Minor, over to Europe, down to Africa, over to India, and then into the Far East, perhaps even to Japan. And of course, then the church multiplied in leaps and bounds. There were many congregations of the Lord's church that existed at that time. Paul the Apostle said the gospel was preached to every creature under heaven. Now he made that statement about 57-58 A.D., which means 29 years after Jesus built his church, Paul could say the gospel had been preached to every creature. So in 29 years, the Eastern Hemisphere was filled with churches of Christ. These were autonomous congregations. We learned that from the New Testament itself. Each church was self-governing, just like we are. We have elders, deacons, teachers. We're self-governing. We stand alone. We have fellowship with McCoynsville Church, but we don't rule over that congregation. That congregation doesn't rule over us. We're all autonomous, whereby we govern ourselves. If we were to apostatize, for example, and go down in the Lord's eyes, his estimation, that's not going to affect the church at McCoynsville. They can still remain true to the Lord. And it's very important that we understand that. It's a very important matter. Paul also said there is one body, which is the church. The body and the church are the same things. Ephesians 4:4, just read a moment ago. Then there's chapter 1, verses 22 and 3, and also Colossians chapter 1, verse 18. So the church, the body, these are synonymous terms. You're talking about the same group of people, okay? So what we see is many different congregations of the Lord's church. However, they constituted but one body. Collectively, worldwide, there's one body, and that is the body of Christ, or if you will, the Church of Christ, or the Church of God if you prefer. Really doesn't matter. But there's only one body. Now, I want to be a member of that one body. Why? Because the Lord adds to his church the saved. I want to be in that body because that body is made up of those who have been saved by the blood of God's Son. There's one body, one spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God. You get the point. The church is united with God. We are the bride of Christ. When two are married, they become one. As the bride of Christ, we become one with Christ. He, the Spirit, the Father, they're one. And we are one in them. Not 2, 3, 2,000. But just one. Christ is the head of his church. This is one of the reasons why the church is referred to the church or body of Christ. The body belongs to him. I got a head, I got a body. If I had one head and two bodies, you would say I was deformed. And rightly so. Because every head only gets one body. Jesus is head. Now these terms are used to teach us something. The Lord knows we understand. One head, one body. He knows that. And he has spoken to us with that kind of terminology. Because he knows that we know what he's talking about. If we're searching for the truth. Now, if it's my determination to defend what we call the Church of Christ, then I'm not so interested in the truth. I'm interested in protecting our little group. But if I'm a seeker of the truth, then if I find a flaw in us as a body of people, it's my responsibility to present that flaw and correct it. It's very important. This is very important. Please, please, please don't underestimate the importance of this matter. It is of the utmost importance. Many, many good people, sincere people, honest people, who are not ready to meet the Lord. Not yet. And it's up to us to be teachers of truth. The Roman Catholic Church was officially born about 600 years after the Church of Christ had been formed. There was an apostasy that was in process. Even as the New Testament was being written, there was an apostasy or a falling away of Christians. They were becoming disobedient. They were rejecting the divine will. They were starting other congregations, distinct and different from the church that was born in the city of Jerusalem. John the Apostle said, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. Notice the first sentence there. They were not of us. What does that mean? They were a member of the congregation, but they weren't of the same spirit. They had a divisive spirit about them. Perhaps they rejected the notion of baptism for remission of sins. They might have said, well, what's water got to do with sin? The church here at Ephesus teaches that you've got to be baptized to be saved. We disagree. And we don't want people thinking we're a bunch of nuts. So they separated themselves from John and the church at Ephesus in order to form a group that could say to the population, oh, we don't believe in that water stuff. That's got nothing to do with salvation. They were of us, they were in the church, but they were not of us in the sense that they had the same spirit, the desire to do the will of God. No more, no less, nothing else. Whatever Jesus wanted done, they didn't necessarily want to do it. He said, well, had they been of the same spirit as us, they would have continued with us. Why go out and start another church? That's unnecessary. If they were of the same spirit we are, they would have just stayed with us. Well, that's not hard to understand. It's just simple logic. But they went out that they might be made manifest, that all the world might know that they weren't like us. They were different. That's apostasy. That's what the word apostasy means, a falling away. And before John's ink dried on this particular letter, apostasies were already occurring. There were people, formerly Christian people, who had fallen from grace and had started churches of their own liking. Okay? Well, that continued. That's the way people are. That idealism continued to rage among the churches. And over a period of time, it got worse and worse. Paul the Apostle prophesied that the end of time wasn't going to come yet. The church at Thessalonica thought the end of time was imminent. They were terrified. And the reason was because a lot of their folks were dead. And they were Christian folks, but they had died. And they thought, if the Lord comes back now, my father, my mother, they're going to miss out on the resurrection. That's how they were thinking in Thessalonica. And Paul wrote the two letters to help them see what the truth of the matter was. Well, one of the things was they thought the end of time was imminent. Paul said, the end of time is not imminent. I can't say that today. I don't know that. Paul was speaking by divine inspiration. And he could say without a shadow of a doubt, the end of time isn't coming until first the falling away comes. He's talking about not a falling away like I was just discussing, but a major falling away that would affect the whole world. The falling away comes first. The man of sin is revealed. He is the son of perdition. Now, after he comes, well, the end of time might be imminent. But until he comes, time isn't going to end. Well, we know that was, he knew for at least 550 years, the time wasn't going to come to an end because the man of sin first had to be revealed. The Roman Catholic Church, you know, this was developed officially in the city of Rome in 606 AD. That's when it became officially the Roman Catholic Church. There had been a lot of events leading up to that day. But on that day, according to the history books and the Catholic Encyclopedia, at that time in that year, she officially became the religion of the state. The word Catholic means universal. The Church of Christ is Catholic. By that I mean she is universal. It's a global church. Well, the Roman Catholic Church, as they named themselves, was also universal, and she grew. And it was just a little bit of time where she had all the churches right there. She had all of them right there. All of them had to bow to Rome or they would die. And thousands upon thousands died because they refused to bow to the Pope in the city of Rome. That was the power of the church during that period of time. John wrote, 1 John 2:18, little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming. Notice the word Antichrist there is capitalized. The Antichrist is used of a person that personifies the apostasy. Okay? Now, preachers and biblical scholars and all that, they'll argue all day. My opinion is that this Antichrist is Papa, the Pope of Rome. I've studied the matter in great detail for 40 years. And I'm personally convinced that this is true. You may not be. That's okay. You don't have to agree with my opinions. I'm telling you what I believe, and I believe it fits the biblical narrative. Little children, is the last hour, as you have heard, Antichrist, notice that, Antichrist is coming. Well, the man of sin, the son of perdition is what Paul referred to him as. He is coming, future tense. John wrote this epistle around 93, 96 AD, somewhere in there, at the end of the first century. He wrote this epistle. And what he's saying, John, Antichrist with a capital A isn't here yet. But he's coming. One day he shall come. One day in the future. That's what he's talking about. The Antichrist is coming. Even now, many Antichrists have come. Small a. Big difference. He's talking about, the word anti means to oppose or to resist. John is saying at the end of the first century, there are many Christians who oppose, who resist the teaching of the Christ. That made them Antichrist, opposers of Jesus. So there were many who were Antichrists. But in the future, there's the ultimate Antichrist who is coming, who I've already told you I believe to be Papa, the man of sin, the son of perdition. Paul spoke about those in 68 AD who resist the truth. To resist the truth is to make a person anti-Christ. Okay, so when you think about Antichrist, there are Antichrists today. There were Antichrists in the first century. Anyone who opposes the teachings of the Son of God is Antichrist. But then there's the Antichrist with a capital A. And we're talking about a whole other matter. We're talking about the leader of a great movement of apostasy. And the only movement that's ever existed in history is Roman Catholicism. Nothing has ever been her equal. She has had more power, more money, more authority than any government on the earth has. During her heyday, the kings would come and kiss the ring or the toe of Papa while he sat on the throne. He's referred to as the Vicar of Christ. What that means is that Christ is reigning in heaven and Papa is reigning on the earth. They share power. They are equal. Now, they don't talk about that so much today, but back when it started, that was the buzz. That he was God on the earth, and he reigned with enormous power. In the book of Revelation, we read about it all through the book of Revelation, especially when you get into chapter 12 and 13, when he is identified to us in the form of a great beast that rose up out of the earth. The Church of Christ now, through all this, was very small. As I said, thousands upon thousands of Christians had been murdered because of their faith in Jesus Christ, because they resisted the Roman Catholic movement, and their church houses were burned while the Christians were in them. In the city of Rome, there are hundreds of thousands of graves in the catacombs underneath the ground, because that's where Christians lived. They couldn't live on top of the ground because they would be caught and killed. So they lived underground the city in these catacombs. They would meet in these catacombs and they would worship the Lord on the first day of the week. But eventually they were all put to death. The Church of Christ, some say, didn't even exist. Oh, she existed. Because once the Lord created his church in the city of Jerusalem in 2930 AD, she was never going to go out of existence, ever. So she did exist. Small, no doubt. But she was there. because any person who believed the New Testament scriptures was a Christian. Didn't matter where you were. Didn't matter if you was a preacher or not. If you read the New Testament scriptures and you decided to follow them, you were a Christian. And if there was 2 or 3 of you, that constituted a church. So she existed in a very, very small form. In 1517 A.D., the world there had grown weary of Papa. They'd have enough of it. Taking their money, taking their lands, the murderous ravages of the Roman army. People were tired of it. And not only that, there was the false teachings that existed. Around 1517, they instituted a doctrine referred to as the sale of indulgences. Now, what that was is that if I wanted to commit adultery, I could go to my priest and I could say, I want to commit adultery, but I don't want to be guilty of sin. And the priest would say, well, give me $100 and you can go commit adultery and it won't be sin. With the money raised from the sale of indulgences, they built St. Peter's Cathedral in the city of Rome. That's how that building came into existence. By selling the right to sin without being a sinner. Oh boy, they've gone too far now. And all over the empire, people were restless. There were a lot of people, there were certain men all over the empire that was very agitated by everything that was going on in the church, because they were all Catholics after all. There was one fellow in particular who gets most of the credit in history, who began a group that was referred to as protesters. This group protested the Roman Church, the teachings of the Roman Church. She had gone too far, and these teachings were unacceptable, and they've got to be revised. They've got to be done away with, the obnoxious teachings. So in 1517, there was a pretty strong movement that existed. They were known as protesters. They became another denomination. I say another, because Roman Catholicism is a denomination. It is not the church Jesus built in Jerusalem in 2930 A.D. It's something different. Therefore, it is a denomination. It looks like Christian religion, but it's not Christian religion. It is a sect. Just like in the first century, we read about Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, the Essenes, all these various sects in Judaism. They weren't devoted to God through the law of Moses. They were devoted to their particular sect or denomination. Well, there was a denomination, and from that there came another denomination which raised up. The Catholics referred to them as protesters because they were protesting Papa and his doctrine. And they eventually became known as Protestants. That's what they call us today. I went to the hospital one time, and they asked me, are you a religious man? I said, I am. What religion? Christian religion. What are you, a Catholic or a Protestant? I ain't neither one. If you're Christian, you got to be either Catholic or Protestant. I ain't neither one. Well, what are you? I'm a Christian. Well, what kind of a Christian are you? The only kind of Christian there is. That's truly Christian. And, well, actually, they got tired of fooling with me, and they left. But I would never admit to being a Protestant, because I'm not Protestant. I'm not a protester. I'm an advocate. And I won't claim to be Protestant. This Protestant Reformation, which commenced in 1517, was led by a priest by the name of Martin Luther. He was a Roman Catholic priest. He protested the teachings of the church. And he said, Papa, these things have to go. Well, for that, he became an enemy of the Christian religion. This denomination was formed, And against his wishes, this church referred to itself as Lutheran. Luther said, do not call the church Luther. Who is Luther? He's nobody. Call yourselves Christians. No more, no less. He died, and after his death, they called themselves Lutherans. Apparently they had a lot of respect for this man. Martin Luther, I think, was a great man. He did great things. And because of it, he suffered a horrible life. But nevertheless, the Lutheran church was born. It wasn't his fault. He just wanted a Christian church to exist. But they wanted a Lutheran church, and that's what they got. Well, other denominations broke off. They didn't like the Lutheran. So a group broke off. They became known as Presbyterian. Another group, I don't like the Presbyterian, they would break off and they would become Methodist. And another group would break off from the Methodist, I don't like this Methodist church, and they created another church. On and on and on it went. I've been told that we've got like 2,000 denominations today. To be honest with you, I don't have a clue how many denominations there are. There are so many. I don't even know how they keep track of them all. But at any rate, the denominations, the Protestant denominations, grew throughout the Roman Empire. I shouldn't say empire. I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church empire. The Roman Empire was gone. Papa was in charge now. And as I said, the kings would kiss his big toe because he was God on the earth. Well, these Protestant churches multiplied through the years. This is known as the Reformation period in history. Remember, it's an important word, Reformation period in history. Well, the Catholic Church, of course, people start going to the New World. Well, Columbus and all them, when they came to the New World, guess what? They're all Catholics. And guess what came with them? The Catholic Church. Wherever a Christian goes, the Church of Christ goes. Wherever a Catholic goes, the Catholic Church goes. So early on, the Catholic Church had a very significant presence in the New World. And she aimed her efforts to South America. And throughout South America, the church was extremely successful. You go down into Mexico or anywhere today, everybody's a Catholic. Well, that came back from all this stuff. It was handed down from one generation to another. But not only did the Roman Catholic Church come to the New World, you know who else came hot on their heels, and that was the denominations. They came also, and they planted their flags all over our country. In addition to that, there was the Church of Christ. Very small, seemingly insignificant, but she was missionary-minded. And because she was missionary-minded, she expanded, she multiplied, she became more and more numerous throughout a 100, 200-year period. She went on mission work into South America. She even went back to the seat of the beast. And the Church of Christ was, of course, strengthened in that region also. So the church became significant. She had been insignificant. She became significant. Some people say Alexander Campbell is the founder of the Church of Christ. Oh, that's not true. The Church of Christ was in North America 150 years before Alexander Campbell ever got here. What I will say about Alexander Campbell, though, he was a brilliant man. On one occasion in a debate, he spoke for 12 hours without stopping. That was how much knowledge this man had of the Holy Scriptures. Alexander Campbell, through debate with denominational preachers and scholars, was one of the main reasons the Churches of Christ became significant. Entire churches were converted to Christ because no one could stand up to Campbell and other men like him. And through their efforts and the efforts of people ever since, the world keeps accepting Christ. Look at India, for example. A Hindu country now has a very significant presence of the Church of Christ. The gospel has a lot of power. Provided people have a good and honest heart, it has a lot of power. This movement was known as Restoration. What took place in Europe and Asia by the denominations was Reformation. They were trying to reform the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church got off course. The doctrines were unappealing. So the protesters, the denominations, they wanted the Catholic Church to drop their teachings. They wouldn't do it. So Martin Luther's group, the Lutherans, they started a church that was exactly Roman Catholic, except they got rid of the doctrines they found unacceptable. They weren't trying to find the Church of Christ, which for all practical purposes had been lost in history. They weren't seeking to find the church that you read about in the second chapter of the book of Acts. They were seeking to reform Roman Catholicism, and that was their mistake. Intention was good, but their methodology was way off base. Restoration was a restoring of New Testament Christianity. In other words, the people, they were minded. They were wanting to worship God, but there was nothing acceptable. And they decided, let's speak where the Bible speaks, and we'll be silent where the Bible is silent. And they opened up their Bibles, and they pored over the Scriptures. And when the will of God was expressed, they would do it. And if there was a doctrine that was very prominent, but they couldn't find it in the Scriptures, they rejected it. They were known as they were called Bible thumpers by many people, because they would say, the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. They were Bible thumpers. They were hated and despised by those who had to debate them. But they swept through the state of Tennessee, for example, and thousands were converted from various denominations to the New Testament church, because the preaching of these peoples was very persuasive. We speak where God speaks. We be silent where God is silent. And that's what we do today. We're not the Church of Christ because we're following the lead of some other person. We're the Church of Christ because we're following the lead of Christ as he outlined it in the New Testament Scriptures. And in our world today, that makes us quite unique. Jesus said, and maybe you can see why, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven. A lot of people say, Lord, Lord. He said, well, just because you call me Lord doesn't mean you're going to go to heaven. But those who do the will of my Father in heaven, they shall live with me throughout eternity. It's one thing to call Jesus Lord. It's another thing to accept him as Lord. Those who accept him as Lord follow his will as best they can. Not perfectly. You all know me. You know what I teach. Not perfectly, but with an intent and aim to be as perfect as possible. Jesus said, the truth shall make you free. The Scriptures, the Holy Scriptures, through them, we can know the identity of the church that Jesus built. And this is what we plead for with all people today. This is what I plead for with people on the internet today. Turn to the Scriptures. Forget your preacher. Forget me. Turn to the Scriptures. Listen to Jesus. He'll give you instruction, and if you follow his instruction, he will add you to his church as well. The Holy Scriptures make it possible for us to know. I remember when I looked out over the religious landscape, it was very confusing. So many churches, unbelievable. Which church is the right church? I went to a Church of Christ with B.R. my baby. And the preacher said, we are the right church. And I thought, man, is that arrogant or what? I didn't like that at all. I didn't care for the Church of Christ. I thought, no, you think you're better than everybody else. Well, I listened a little bit more because I wanted to talk her into marrying me. So I kept going back and going back. And as I went back, I did what the preachers were saying. I picked up a Bible, and I started reading it. Never had read it before. I was a Bible scholar, and I had never even read the book, but I could tell you all about it. And when I started reading that book, I was amazed at how simple it was. It was so simple that even an ignoramus like me could understand it. I was so far from being a Christian, you would not even believe it. Had no desire to be a Christian. But as I read the Bible, I changed. I didn't become a Christian because BR was. I'd never do that. I wouldn't disgrace her church. I wouldn't disgrace her. I became a New Testament Christian because I was convinced it was true. It was a long time after her and I got married before I ever became a Christian. But I was convinced it was true. I read the book. And I've been encouraging people to read the book ever since. It works. Paul said it's the power of God. The words in the Bible are words which can prick a person's heart, turn them inside out and upside down, and make them do things they would never think they would do. I used to have hair down to my shoulder blades and play rock and roll music while I was a monkey. Somebody would have told me I'd be a preacher one day, I would have laughed so hard I would have fallen apart like Humpty Dumpty. And look at me now. Paul said it's the power of God unto salvation. And he was right. It's the most magnificent thing I've ever read. I treasure my Bible so much. I've lived with it for over 40 years. And when I say I lived with it, I've truly lived with it. And you can ask BR. You can ask my children. And this is what we want people to do. Don't believe me. Who am I? I'm a nobody. I'm like Luther. I'm a nobody. It's not about believing me. I'm a guy who reads the Bible and tells other people what it says. At least according to me. It's not about believing me. It's about believing Jesus. It's all about believing him. If you're not a Christian, you are to become a Christian. We are here for that very purpose, to make a single choice. Will I become a Christian? Will I listen to God or not? Will I resist him? Will I oppose him? Will I be for Christ or will I be anti-Christ? That's the decision every person born into this world has to deal with. And if we don't find the right answer before we leave this world, we'll not be prepared to meet our Maker. And that would be catastrophic. If you're not a Christian, you are to believe Jesus. Stop sinning. Stop transgressing the divine will. Confess his name to people like I do now. Confess his name at work and everywhere else. Be immersed in water. Why? The Lord said that's when I take away sin, Colossians 2 and 12. So I wanted my sins taken away. I didn't understand why I had to go underwater, but I went because I know that's what the Bible taught. As Christians, we are to spread the gospel. We are to teach others. As I have taught you, you are to go forth and teach others. Kindly, gently, but to the point. Help people see what the intent and the purpose of the gospel is. If they reject it, then it's on them. But if we make no attempt to carry the gospel to others, then it's on me. Sometimes when we examine ourselves, we're not happy with what we see. And we want forgiveness so much. And because there is power in prayer, we know there is much power in many prayers. And we want the church to pray for me. I've done it a number of times through the years. Perhaps you need to do that today. I don't know. But if you need to respond to our Lord's invitation, we hope you'll come and do that while together we stand.